Where's the clicker?
Yeah, I've done it. All right. Welcome, everyone.
All right, welcome everybody. This is our September meetup. So welcome back to those of you who are familiar faces, and for those of you who are not, welcome. Hope you enjoy tonight. If you've got any questions, feel free to chat to me and Ryan at any point throughout the evening, and we can, answer any questions you may have about the user group. But yeah, tonight we are, first of all, we want to get this out of the way, right? So myself and Ryan and Paul and Anthony and our amazing guest speaker from a company in Sussex, I'll let him introduce himself later. We all are doing this out of our own backs, right? These are all our personal opinions. This is, don't say, oh, I went to this user group and this guy from Microsoft said this, right? Because we'll deny everything. And the same goes for all of our wonderful speakers. So, please take this as our own opinions and know that it's a safe space, right? We want you guys to be able to share that as well, right? We do not care where you've come from. You're here to talk about amazing technology, and we want you to feel safe in doing that. All right, so
do this one?
Yeah, go for it.
So yeah, just a quick note, a bit of housekeeping on our diversity charter. We welcome anyone, age, color, ethnicity, anything. So everyone is welcome to this group. If you feel like that's not being held as part of this session, then please chat to me and Jack about that. Yeah, it's a strong part of our charter. What's this slide about? Right, we're back. So this is the first one of these that we've done where we're streaming live to YouTube. Hello, people online. Thank you for watching. Who are we? So Jack and I decided to form this group back in 2020, I think. 2019.
Yeah, when
yes.
the world was normal.
Exactly. It was in this building downstairs. If this is the first time you've been here, but it was a larger space. But yeah, we were kind of doing this off, basically because we'd attended a few groups in London. There wasn't really anything in the Sussex area. So we thought that we'd start one up, and it's purely focused on Azure, as you've seen. What is it about? So it's really to form a community about people that use Microsoft Azure on a day-to-day or semi-frequently basis, and how we can share experiences and stories and learn from each other, really.
Yeah. So I think without further ado, you've all been enjoying the wonderful beers, pizzas, soft drinks that have been provided. And I'm really happy to announce that NetApp have been sponsoring us. And I'd just like to invite Anthony, who works for NetApp and is a former colleague and friend of ours, to come and do a little bit about NetApp, tell you what they're about, and, come and share what he's got to say. And obviously, they pay for the pizza. So, round of applause, guys.
Thanks, Jack. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. As Jack said, I work for NetApp. I'm a cloud solution architect, but actually I specialize in Azure. And NetApp is also similar to the Microsoft Drive for community. We're also looking to support and help those in the community who want to obviously consume and understand the technology and everything else. A quick bit about NetApp. So the NetApp Microsoft relationship. NetApp is a global cloud-led data-centric software company. Most people might think of NetApp as a box company. They sell data boxes in data centers. Actually, we're very far from that. NetApp was founded 30 years ago based on software, based on the ONTAP operating system and the waffle file system. And this is the perception most people think of us. We are box shifters. We're far from that. NetApp's journey in the cloud has been going now for best part of 8 years. And if anybody's familiar with our products and services, we have third-party offerings within Azure. We also have first-party offerings. The first-party offering is Azure NetApp Files. This then enables the ability to consume on demand. You don't need licenses. You don't need to buy bits of tin. You can simply consume high-performance, low-latency storage as and when you need that. It does have specific workloads, but we also have many other products which are part of our portfolio. Within the storage, we have Cloud Volumes ONTAP. Anybody who's familiar with NetApp historically, Cloud Volumes ONTAP is simply a virtualized version of ONTAP running within Azure. It brings all the features, the benefits that NetApp has traditionally on premises, and you can consume them as you would do, but within the Azure ecosystem. We also have Azure NetApp Files. As I mentioned, this is a first-party Microsoft product. It's delivered to you by Microsoft, built by Microsoft, supported by Microsoft. It allows you to consume high-performance storage on demand as you need it. And there are a few workloads, and I'll talk about those in a second. We have many, many other cloud portfolio products now, which are available in the Azure marketplace for you to also consume. Things like our cloud backup service, cloud tiering, cloud data sense insights. And in the container space, we have our Astra Trident product as well, which is persistent storage for containers. The most important product I feel that we do have is Cloud Data Sense. What Cloud Data Sense gives you is a governance and compliance tool, which essentially scans your repositories and tells you where you're going wrong. And it's agnostic as well. You can do this on premises and, God forbid, in other clouds. It will tell you, for instance, GDPR data, PCI DSS, data which are personally identifiable information. It's very simple to deploy. It will scan your repositories. These repositories could be file storage, they could be SharePoint, databases, and we do also have plans on the roadmap to support things like Microsoft Exchange. Oh, I think there's a slide missing there. I do apologize. Anyway, it's a very, very quick overview of what NetApp can bring, and just to highlight that we are far more than a company that sells boxes and bits of tin. We're very much a cloud-focused software company. I'm here all afternoon or all evening. Please come up and say hello and say hi. And if you want to chat about any more of the products, I'm very, very happy to have this conversation. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Anthony. Definitely go and chat to him. NetApp got some great products. One that I'm a high fan of, ANF. If you've not checked it out, go and look at it. You'll never look back in file shares. And with that, I'd also like to introduce the wonderful team from Silicon Brighton tonight. So we've got a few faces here. You've met Grace at the door, welcoming you in. And you've got Charlie, the awesome AV guy, looking after all of our streaming to YouTube tonight. But I'd just like to invite Grace to come and chat a little bit what Silicon Brighton do for us and how amazing their support is with, firstly, our amazing new branding that you've all seen. So yeah, over to Grace.
Thank you so much. And yes, hi everyone. I'm Grace and I'm the Programme Director for Silicon Brighton. We were founded about probably the same time as Sussex Azure actually, with kind of similar thoughts that there wasn't really much going on for the tech community here in Brighton. And actually, if we sort of bring people together with events, a chance to kind of network, learn new things, then actually just kind of helps the community to thrive. So we sort of did a similar thing, but we support lots of different meetups across Brighton. There is no longer one or two. We work with about 20 altogether. So there's loads of amazing stuff happening in this similar space, all with free beer and pizza as well, and great AV and great people from Silicon Brighton. So yeah, if you want to kind of have a look at some of the other stuff, learn new skills, maybe, yeah, there's something else that you're interested in. If you've got teams or friends that kind of want to get involved as well, I'll share some links afterwards. And then similarly, kind of if you're sort of looking at setting up a new initiative, or if you've kind of got an idea for speaking or collaboration in any way, if there's anything at all that you're sort of doing that's going to help the community to thrive, we're here to support, whether it's branding, finding an event, bit of marketing and promotion. So yeah, reach out, come and speak to me. We're here to help when we can.
Thank you, Grace. And yeah, obviously some amazing work these guys do. Check out the website and we'll share some more of their meetups that they're helping out at the end, as well as our own, obviously. So tonight, the reason you're all here, hopefully, is we're going to be talking around Azure Landing Zones. And we're joined by some of the team, one of them being myself and Paul, who we will introduce in a second. We'll give you a bit of an overview about what ALZ is. It was a hot topic at the end of our last month. Our last meetup, not last month. Got to get out of that habit. And then we've got Nick Fry from a local Sussex-based enterprise, who I will let him introduce himself later. I'll keep teasing you with that right now. Who's going to talk about then how he has used Azure Landing Zones and how it's helped their business to grow and accelerate their adoption of Azure. So before we get into that, this is a teaser, right? And I want you to have a little think about some of these slides. So feel free to scan the QR code. We'll have a future meetup happening, so make sure you're registered to our meetup. But if you did sign up here, you're already part of that and you will get spammed by us, so enjoy. If you've got an idea, if you want to be up here talking, like Nick last time, I've got to get myself out of that habit, said that he wanted to come and do a talk. We are happy to support you. If you have never spoken before, you want a safe place to do it. Me, Ryan, Paul even has been helping out Nick, going through, does this look okay? Are these slides good? All that stuff. We are there to give you a platform. Use it. Right, we are here for you. I don't want to be up here every month talking because I'd quite like to be sitting down eating pizza and drinking beer. And also, there is a December meetup, a Christmas social with the wonderful Silicon Brighton and the rest of their community. So we will be sharing dates for that. It does say TBC, but Grace did tell me earlier, so we may be able to share a little bit later. Sneak preview. Yeah, exactly. At the end, you got to stay to hear the date. But yeah, check that out, and obviously that'll be a great tech community of all different flavors and bits of technology. We can go and nerd out in a pub and have a good time for Christmas. So with that, I'd like to introduce my my esteemed colleague and friend, Mr. Grimley, back for his second appearance on the Sussex Azure user group. He did the second video. Come over here. Yeah, so we did a video during lockdown about Azure exam certifications, all those sort of things that we streamed. If any of you joined that, you would have heard my wife drop a plate in the background and disrupt the whole start of the user group, which was amazing. She was mortified. But, you know, we styled it through, and it's one of our most watched user group videos on YouTube. So go and check it out if you're looking at your exams. A little bit out of date, but the principles still apply. And we're here to talk about Azure Landing Zones. I'm going to stop talking, go and grab a beer, and I'm going to hand over to Paul for a little bit and take it from here. That one.
Evening, everyone. I'm not from around these parts, so thank you for having me. I'm actually from Staffordshire, just north of Birmingham. And yeah, great to be back, second time. I really enjoyed the first time. Bizarrely, this is my first time out the house. I've worked in my house for the last 2 years. The only 2 times I've left my house for work is to go to Seattle. So how crazy is that? I've not even been to my own Microsoft offices in the UK, but great to be here to see you all in person. It feels a bit weird. Having lots of eyes staring at me because normally it's my computer screen staring at me, but really, really glad to be back in person and looking forward to talking to you throughout the night as well as we go through. So I'm going to kick this off, just talk a little bit before we dive into Azure Landing Zones. Jack's going to come back up in a minute and you're going to hear him again, unfortunately. But I will talk to you a bit about Azure Landing Zones, give you a bit of understanding of the basic principles, and then Jack's going to dive into some detail, and I'll kind of round off with some discussions about the future. So one thing I forgot to say is, who am I? I'm a program manager. So I work very closely with Jack. I'm a program manager working on Azure Landing Zones. So what I basically do is I listen to people like your good selves and the field within Microsoft, and we bring back your feedback, and we help develop the product that is becoming Azure Landing Zone, and we will talk about that as we move through. So before we dive into Azure Landing Zones, what you need to know is Azure Landing Zones, there's a lot more to it than just Azure Landing Zones. It's part of a bigger thing. So cloud adoption framework. So we won't go into cloud adoption framework in detail, but I wanted to call out this slide just to talk to you about where it fits. So you can see the box ready in the middle. Azure Landing Zone is part of ready. Now, one thing that I've experienced, I've been in the field before I was a program manager working with customers. In fact, you'll hear from Nick. Nick was actually my customer when I was working in the UK team. It's really important to try and align to the cloud adoption framework. Now, it sounds easy, right? When I'm not part of the kind of pressures that you will have as a company or an organization trying to drive forward and just get something built, move something, make it happen. We want to see some lights switched on. We want to see some web pages loaded. But the key to this is, if you look at the strategy and plan, if you build Azure Landing Zones without planning and strategy, you'll end up having to go back. And what that might mean is disruption to things that you have in flight. So if you've got projects in flight and you're trying to deliver things and you haven't kind of thought about, well, how do I tag this and how do I cost this? Who's going to pay for this, right? You need to then go back to the beginning to define strategy. Now, sometimes I get it, right? Working with customers, as I say, want to see things turned on, want to see lights on, and that's fine. Just realize that you might, please educate. Go back and educate, or listen and educate. From hearing this, is that it's really important to do that planning and strategy, because who's going to support it when you've got that thing up there? How's that going to work? What's your operating model? So there's lots of things to this, but again, ready is what we're going to focus on tonight, and this is where Azure Landing Zones is part of. So this is where you basically start making things happen in Azure. Okay, Azure Landing Zones. See if this builds out. Right, okay, so think of Azure Landing Zones like a metropolis. So you're trying to build a city, right? So if we use the analogy of utilities, so that's pretty much what Azure Landing Zone is. It's not necessarily building the end product of your workload, it's giving you everything to get that workload up and running. So if we think of this metropolis, we've got the water and gas. If you're going to build a house, you're going to build a high-rise tower, you need power, you need how do you get rid of the waste? All those kind of things. Azure Landing Zone is effectively that kind of structure to get to the building, all those power, water, etc. So you need to think of Azure Landing Zone as that kind of roads that are built, the lights outside, all these things. This is how we kind of pitch and position Azure Landing Zone as the kind of starting base for you to then bring your workloads to Azure. Okay, so setting up Azure Landing Zones, scale, security, networking, these are all those kind of things. If we kind of go from that analogy, is if we're looking at the water, the utilities, the gas, etc., we look at things like security, governance, networking, identity. I'm sure some of you know, if you're working in this space, that having a networking conversation is something you need to have fairly soon in that conversation, right? You can't just go and say, we want to do, X in the cloud. You need to have that. How are you going to get to it? How are you going to provide access? Who needs access? What does that security look like? What about latency, bandwidth, all those kind of things? What about certain IP ranges? How do we block access to this? So this is effectively what Azure Landing Zones is providing, those guardrails and policies to help you through those kind of design journeys and principles that we have as part of Azure Landing Zone. So we developed this based on what we heard from yourselves and our customers, throughout Microsoft. As we heard loud and clear that we needed to develop something that provided a baseline to work from and accelerate your conversations, your Azure experience, without having to do this each time yourself. So this is effectively what we're doing, is we're building something that you can accelerate your kind of journey quickly and get yourselves up and running. It enables new workloads quicker as well, like migrations, etc. So we heard about NetApp. So you need these foundations to bring your file shares, cloud storage together. So this is kind of a key component for that. So the design principles, you'll hear some of this as we go through and things that we're working on as well. But these principles haven't changed from Azure Landing Zones being GA just over 2 years ago now. Subscription democratization. So in the old days, we used to say, put everything in one subscription, keep it all kind of in one subscription. As our kind of products have matured in Microsoft, we've got the guardrails to be able to allow you to expand. And what that expansion helps you do is still keep control through the controls that we have, like policy guardrails that mean that you can still kind of build out your subscriptions, but maintain that control. So kind of, if you're kind of running this and owning this, making you be able to sleep at night as you kind of hand out these subscriptions to kind of new application owners, because above those subscriptions, you have the guardrails in place. You've kind of said you can't have public access to this. It's only this IP range. So we didn't have those controls previously. So this is what Azure Landing Zone brings, is that value and that ability for you to scale quickly as well, with that assurance that you've kind of put those in place and you can just keep scaling without that need to kind of revisit the conversation every time a new subscription comes on. I touched on policy-driven governance as well. So all those things about RDP access. Can you have RDP access? We've got a multitude of policies as part of Azure Landing Zone. Key thing to mention here is they are extensions of the built-in policy. So the Azure Landing Zone team, we have and maintain a number of policies that currently aren't in place in the built-in policy. So that it may be that if you've kind of just got Azure out the box and you're trying to do something, we may have a policy that does what you're needing to do without you having to engineer that yourself. Again, it's about getting you from A to B quicker without having to reinvent the wheel, because we've created that wheel. Just take that wheel and use it. So the single control and management plane, we always talk about, and it kind of ties in with a native as well. We're always trying to use and encourage native Microsoft technology so you can have a first-party experience. Obviously, bringing in third-party products can introduce additional complexity. As how do I go to where to get reporting on X, Y, and Z component I've got? So we always try and drive with that single control plane to allow you to manage the platform. So application-centric and archetype neutral. So what this basically means is bring anything to Azure. If it's your old legacy system or it's a cloud native, it doesn't matter. We're not kind of focusing on anything specific, and you can use the landing zone to be scalable and build out archetypes if you need to do so, such as AVS or AVD or anything like that. You can have specific guardrails that you put in place for AVD that wouldn't be necessarily relevant for other things that you bring to Azure. or build natively in Azure. And again, as I said, native design and platform roadmap. So we're evolving the product, right? The amount of updates that we get every day on what's changing, what's new, the benefits that you have from kind of staying close and true to the Microsoft products will help you drive kind of those roadmap features out, and you'll be able to adopt them quicker by leveraging those. Okay, so I've just built that slide out. So just very quickly on the design areas. So we've got the environment and compliance that these are split out to. So Azure billing, one of the key things I always kind of talk about here is around billing, right? When you're setting up Azure, you're setting up subscriptions. Who's going to pay for that? Because it's not necessarily the same person every time. So you want to make sure you're going through that. And I'm not going to cover these in detail. I can see Jack standing up, so he's telling me to move on. Quickly, as you go through identity, resource organization. So where do you put your resources? Do they go in, which location do they go in? Do they go in one subscription? Network topology is key, getting your networking set up so that how are you going to get to the cloud? Are you going to go VPN? Are you just kind of dipping your toe at the moment, or are you going all in? And then looking down the right, how do you comply? Security and the governance elements. We talked about policy, and you've got all the security products and features as well. The management components like monitoring and backup. And then how do you kind of maintain and keep your Azure environment up to date through the platform automation and DevOps? So this very busy diagram here, this video is effectively, if you go to Azure Landing Zones, you can effectively click and deploy this into your tenant very quickly. And there's a lot to cover here. I'm absolutely not here to talk to you about all of it, but I just want to give you a kind of flavor of the certain things. Like you've got a management subscription, identity subscription. So what we're effectively doing here is splitting things out. This helps that kind of responsibility model if you're kind of got different teams working in Azure and you want to kind of ring fence their responsibilities through RBAC. This will help you do that very quickly. And then we've got the, if you look at the landing zone, you've got SAP Corp and Online. This is where you typically will build out your applications and build on top of that framework we've got there. Okay, right, I'm going to move on very quickly. Ways to implement. So you saw the previous screen, that busy diagram. There's 3 different ways that you can deploy this. If you're happy in the portal, you can start in the portal, click to deploy, put all your kind of information in and what you want, the naming conventions, etc. And that will effectively deploy that through the portal. Or if you're kind of into Terraform, you can do it through Terraform. And recently as well, we have Bicep as well. So there's 3 different ways that you can implement this. Obviously, the latter 2 are kind of infrastructure as code, DevOps and pipelines. We're definitely pushing towards that. But if you're not comfortable with that and you want to start by just having a play, the portal way is a really good way of kind of understanding what we're about and visualizing that. Jack, back over to you.
Thank you. All right, so apologies if you can hear the noise downstairs. There's actually a gig going on beneath us as well. So if you can hear what's going on downstairs, it's a comedy night, although I'm just as funny, so you're good. So yeah, come on, you got to get it in. So why did we create, like Paul's obviously mentioned some of the reasons why we created Azure Landing Zones. And some of these key challenges, right? We heard from time and time again, like if you used to go in the cloud adoption framework, you probably saw like 13 different options for landing zones, like virtual data center construct, enterprise data center in a box. You would have seen the migration landing zone blueprint. Like there were all these different options and customers were like, which one do I pick? Because they all sound like me. So we were like, that's a good point. We'll create one called Azure Landing Zones, or enterprise scale if you've previously heard of its name. Enterprise scale is Azure Landing Zones. We're going through a rebranding journey. It's slowly migrating. If I'd have just renamed it in one day, everybody gone like, what happened to enterprise scale? So we're doing it over time so that people get used to that rebranding. Operating compatibility, right? So we're talking around operating models here. So whether you are a central IT team that does everything for your business, enterprise scale or Azure Landing Zones can work for you. If you're in that highly distributed or enterprise operating model where you've got different teams that do different bits, you've got a CCOE that does the platform bit and the governance and security, you've got a network team that does the network bit, you've got individual application landing zone owners that do their bit, it can work for you, right? It's highly flexible and can do any of those bits for you. And this is the key one at the bottom, right? It's a lack of trust and desire for control. So if you think about most businesses, you go in and say, hey, we want to do cloud. That's their number one concern. We don't trust people, but we want to give them access to it to go and deliver the value to the business. And Azure Landing Zones is all about how do we enable that and basically get businesses going. So I'll should have remembered that was there. I'm going to bring in our good friend Lady Justice, and this was built by an old colleague of mine and a good friend still, based out of a team that I used to work with when we used to work on Azure Landing Zones together. And it's a really nice slide, right? So if you think about Lady Justice, right? Lady Justice is all about trying to find the balance between businesses, right? So you've got the developers on the left-hand side who want innovation. They want to go fast. They want to democratize. They want to just do things and have freedom and resilience. But then on the right-hand side, you've got the platform team and the security guys going, whoa, 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 you can't just do all this stuff, right? We've got to control what you do. You've got to do these things. You've got to make sure you've got backups. You've got to make sure you don't expose ports to the internet. You've got all of these sort of bits and pieces. You've got to make sure you don't go wild on costs. So think about Azure Landing Zones, just trying to find that balance between those two, right? It's a really good way of pitching it to customers and helping them understand what it's all about. ALZ has a superpower, right? So if we build up Azure really slowly, like right at the bottom, we have all of these resource providers. So whether it's storage, virtual networks, VMs, whatever it is, this is the base layer this is what people want to deploy. These are the things that you use. Above that, you then have ARM, right? The Azure Resource Manager, which is the API that you all interact with, whether you're using the portal, whether you're using Bicep, whether you're using Terraform, PowerShell, whatever it is. But then right in the middle, we have our good friend policy enforcement, right? Which means nobody can get around policy. So whether they want to use Terraform, they want to use the portal, they do a direct REST API call, they cannot avoid policy. So using policy is your best friend from a security and compliance manner, because nobody can avoid the damn thing, which is great. Then you've got clients at the top. And as I said, no matter what client's up there, whether it's even not listed, the only way into Azure is this management.azure.com. That is the front end. So if you want to make any request into Azure, it has to go through the ARM service. And therefore, if we use policy, we protect ourselves at scale, regardless of how it's being used. So let's go through an example. Let's make this a little bit tangible. Now, apologies, there's no demo, but I'll click through these slides and try and make it as realistic as possible. So imagine you've created a new subscription. You've put it inside of a management group based on the diagram that Paul showed earlier. And within about 5 to 10 minutes, and you can even set this to 0 now, policy kicks in and starts scanning that subscription and goes, is this compliant? Do these things exist? Are these things, as what we've just configured? It will then go, well, out of the things that I did see that were correct, I'll leave those alone because I don't need to do anything. They're all good. But of the things that aren't right, I'm going to now go and kick off a load of deployments using deploy if not exist policies or modify policies to go and put those settings in place that I need to put in place to control. That then kicks off a load of deployments. And as you can see, all these deployments succeed on the subscription using a managed identity behind the scenes. So there's no stored credentials anywhere because it's just a managed identity associated to that policy assignment. And as you can see, we've automatically configured the activity logs for a subscription to be sent to a central log analytics workspace. Security, have we got all the logs for all the subscriptions? Yes, done out of the box. Don't worry about it. This is a bit of an old slide. It says deploy ASC configuration, so Security Center, but it is now updated to say MDFC, so Microsoft Defender for Cloud. That was a great rename, good fun for me. But that is then configuring Security Center or Defender for Cloud on all of those subscriptions with the standard tier automatically on all those subscriptions at scale, right? Very, very quickly. Nothing has to be done by any of the application owners. They get a new subscription, so already compliant with the policy team from the start. Now, obviously, you can use other policy effects, deny, audit, all of those things, but we generally use deploy if not exists or modify for these more putting settings in place that should be in place. And we use deny for the things that we go, hey, you really shouldn't be doing that. You're going to get a warning message, an error message back, change your configuration and try again. But policy is the heart of Azure Landing Zones. Now, we've used the term landing zone an awful lot here. So what does we mean by a landing zone? There are many different meanings to the term landing zone. So I'm just going to build this slide out and we can talk about it a little more. So Azure Landing Zone is all about establishing that enterprise control plane, right? That platform piece where your central governance teams or your CCOEs are interested. What policies have we got in place? How many subscriptions have we got? What's the cost? All of those sort of things. What's the hub networking? What's our identity strategy? All of those design areas that Paul mentioned that we've got extensive documentation for. Then on top of that, we want to enable application or workload landing zones. So these are subscriptions that you give to development teams, application teams, or whoever that want to consume Azure to deploy their services into and deliver value to the business. Now, there are different types of these landing zones. Now, if you go to the what is a landing zone page, so aka.ms/ALZ, you will find that this is documented, how this all works. But I'll briefly explain it. Centrally managed is we've got a central IT team. They do everything for us. We follow a centralized sort of IT operating model, right? There's no application or development teams. Central IT do everything, whether it's putting a VM in a network or, putting a new policy in place. We have tech platform landing zones. So if you think about AKS or you think about Azure VMware solution, they are platforms on top of an Azure platform, which you can then multi-tenant or use individually. That is a different type, and it may be operated differently. You might have an AKS operation teams who look after just all of your AKS clusters for a business, but don't touch the policy stuff, right? They're more focused around that workload, that technology platform. And then we've got the most common that we would see is our workload landing zone. Just give me the subscription. I'm going to deploy what I like into it, but all the policies are still going to be enforced, and I can't avoid those things. So I'm deploying an app service and a website. I'm deploying a SQL DB, those sort of things where it's not a platform. It's very much just that workload. They know what they're doing. Hand over the keys, off they go. So some common questions. How many subscriptions should I use in Azure? I actually recorded a video with some colleagues. So Kevin and Matt, who are two key contributors, colleagues of mine and Paul that we work with on a daily basis. We created a video of this. So if you head to this link, aka.ms/CAE YouTube, and you're probably wondering, what does CAE mean? It's the team that I work in, so customer architecture and engineering. And we recorded a video on this, but we basically give you the guidance, and it's not saying use one, as Paul rightly mentioned. It's about using multiple, but finding that right scale unit for your business. And I'm sure Nick's going to talk around this a little bit later about how his business have done this, because there is no right answer. And this video will give you some tips and guiding principles around when to say maybe another subscription versus using the same subscription. But go and check this out. Give us some feedback, leave us some comments on YouTube. We do really listen. But I do want to break some myths, because these are the common challenges. I get back to this question when you go, well, we just have one subscription because that works fine for us, right? More subscriptions does not equal harder to manage. It did about 5 years ago. We need to get with the times, and the portal and everything else, like Azure Resource Graph and all these great investments that we've made are all cross-subscription, right? So there is no longer these limitations around cross-subscription workloads. It actually reduces the blast radius and improves your security posture, because if you compromise a single subscription, you're only compromising what's in there. If you put everything in there, that's an easy attack to target for a hacker. So put things in different subscriptions that make sense, reduce your blast radius. Moving resources between subscriptions can be painful. Who's tried to move resources between subscriptions in Azure? Who wishes they never started doing that process? Exactly. Don't put them in the same subscription. Try and segregate them from the start. You don't end up under a load of boxes and wishing you never started. Yeah, and if you've got VNet integration enabled, you have to disable that and then do it. And it's all different per service. I was speaking to a customer in France about this today. It is a very, very painful problem we are aware of, but it is down to each individual service team to be able to support that individual thing. So it's not just a thing that we can enable in Azure. It's all of the individual services have to do working as well. Yeah, generally you are better off redeploying it. Do everything in infrastructure as code, redeploy and migrate, absolutely. Separate subscriptions for individual workloads gives you a better governance and identity model, right? So you can say this subscription or workload landing zone is this identity and this team. We can be controlled by those, and happy days, we're off to the races. And remember our good friend Lady Justice, ALZ enables multi-subscriptions at scale. So then if you go, well, we can't control all these subscriptions, yes, you can, use Azure Landing Zones, and you've got policy to help you along the way. Right. The other thing we get is dev test prod guidance, right? How do we handle dev test prod for applications and workloads? Guess what? I'll create another video for this as well, because we got asked this question an awful lot, and it is a complicated topic. We also have this documented in our FAQ, which we link to in here, so go and check it out, or go to aka.ms/alz/DTP for dev test prod, and you'll get to the guidance. But go and check out this video. We talk around the different types of testing and how you should handle dev test prod. Basically, don't build dev test prod management groups, because it doesn't scale, and you end up making loads of duplicate policy assignments that you then have to manage and wish you never did. We've seen so many customers go down that route that actually there should be nothing different from an Azure policy perspective that looks at your platform components between dev test and prod. There may be differences in the VM configuration and stuff like that. Policy's not really getting involved at that stage. We're focused at the ARM control plane, right? We're saying, has it got a managed disk? Is the NIC got a public IP address on it? We're not saying, has that got a file in this folder or in this VM? Right? That's a different start. That's DSC, right? That's not what we're about. Although policy is starting to creep into that space with guest configuration. So watch out. That's another thing we've got to talk about, Paul, and start adding support for that. How do we handle dev test prod for enterprise scale itself? Nick is definitely talking about this one. So we have something called Canary, because if I called it dev, everybody would get confused with the other dev test prod. So we call it Canary, but it's all about how do I build in the same tenant. So we don't want you to build multiple Azure AD tenants. It's difficult. It makes licensing more expensive. You get into all these weird, like, oh, we're a guest in here, but I've got an account over here, and it just gets complicated, right? So do it all in one subscription. One tenant. That means you can have one set of licenses and use things like PIM and all those good things to control your access. But you can build the same hierarchy that you would build for Azure Landing Zones in the same tenant and do all your testing of new policies and stuff like that over in a Canary environment. Once you're happy, promote it into production. Happy days, right? Gives you a really flexible model. And again, we have some guidance for this. It's probably the first document I wrote when I joined the team. So go and check it out. If you've got any feedback, you know who to harass. But please use the GitHub issues on the page. Other useful guidance. So what other stuff do we have, right? And this is a whistle-stop tour, right? So feel free to people online to hit questions and chat, and we'll get back to you if we can't get to you on the night. Or use the GitHub issues and stuff like that, and we'll come back to you. There's loads of ways to get in touch with us. Tailoring. So you've seen that big architecture diagram, you've seen the management group hierarchy, you've heard us talk about archetypes, and you'd be like, well, corporate online isn't for us. Corporate online, the 101 is public and private, right? That's a good way of thinking about it. We just use fancier names. So if you think about it, that you can put public-facing workloads in online, and you can put private only, like no public IPs, no IP forwarding in corp. That's a good way to think about the different policy assignments we make to enforce a different governance model and build a different archetype. So if you go and read this document, which we published about 3 months ago, it talks around how you build an archetype and what not to do and what to do. So we talk about how to customize the hierarchy safely. And as you'll notice down here, don't create archetypes for environments like dev test prod, because we see it all the time and it gets you in trouble. It just makes your life so much more complicated. There may be some of you, especially in the Brighton world, that work for SaaS companies or software development companies or selling products as ISVs, right? We have guidance for you as well for Azure Landing Zone. So it's slightly different because you need to operate in a slightly different scale pattern. Some of the ISVs we've been working with do 50,000 subscriptions per application. So, they provision 50,000 subscriptions in one go and then go, right, how do we govern all these? And we're like, right, you might need something slightly different to most enterprises, but it follows a fairly similar guidance. So please do go and check that out as well, and give us your feedback. And with that, I will hand back to Mr. Grimley to talk about where we're going in the future. There's one missing from here, Paul. What do you think it is?
Oh, that's a bit of a trap there, Jack. I might have to call you up on that one. Oh dear. Okay. Oh really? Okay. Right. Okay, so yeah, I think we were just putting this together this afternoon, me and Jack. I just wanted to kind of share with you some of the things that we're doing now. Looking forward, not necessarily committed, but these are things that we are investing our time in based on feedback and how we drive the Azure Landing Zone forward. So you've heard subscription vending. You're going to hear it again from Nick. We've had some large enterprise customers who want to crank out subscriptions with a click of a button, throw a parameter file at it, and away they go. And we heard that loud and clear, and we've got a lot of interest in that. So subscription vending is one that we're looking at doing. Staying up to date, this is one actually I'm very close to myself. So one thing you may or may not know about Azure Landing Zone is if you do the portal deployment, it's a click in time deployment. So at the point you deploy it is the point that you take everything that we've created, and it's then sucked into your tenant, and that's it. That's then disconnected. You have a point in time connection with us, and then that's it. You've taken that and you move forward. Now, what we're looking to do here is we recognize that things change, policies get updated, the custom policies that we work on. How do you get those policies in your environment? How do you then get those updates to you? So I'm working in that area to focus on what does that look like? What are the problem and pain points of that? So that's a key area that we're looking at as well. It's internally known as Evergreen. We're not necessarily sure whether that will be a thing that we kind of go with, but just sharing that with you. Ultimately, it may just be kind of like rhythm of business with kind of Azure Landing Zone platform. We're not there yet. We're the technical side of the house. We'll have to talk to our marketing team about that, but just to share that with you. So multi-tenant guidance as well. Now, whilst we try and drive a simple single tenant Azure AD tenant environment, We recognize that we have lots of brownfield customers who want to use Azure Landing Zone, and that comes with the likelihood is they've adopted Office 365 and therefore may have already got a multi-tenant strategy and already gone through that. So we're looking at developing some guidance to help onboard that kind of conversation as well, because we recognize that is coming up. The complexities that come with that is licenses, because if you've got licenses in one tenant, then you're trying to test things and it's not the same in the other tenant because you haven't got license in that. Those kind of things add complications there. Policy refresh, it kind of touches on the evergreen piece here, but we are doing some investigation there. I can't really speak too much about it, but basically, ultimately everything we're trying to do here is to make Azure Landing Zone even easier to use. Once you've set it up, how do you keep using it? How do you keep watering and feeding Azure Landing Zone? So that's what we're looking at with policy refresh. So again, one of the things that the Azure Landing Zone policies, the custom policies I talked about, we built those because the product groups hadn't at the time. So they were where we identified gaps, and we recognized our customers needed to use that product, but there was a gap in it. So we built these policies. What we ideally would like to do is the product groups individually kind of create them, but they've got a whole priority of their own work to do. So we're kind of trying to fight their priorities to get that up. But in the meantime, we've built them in Azure Landing Zones, but we want to work more closely with product groups and the policy engine team. So how do we make policy become a first-party experience in Azure Landing Zone? Monitoring enhancements as well. This is me again. So we recognize with Monitor, Azure Monitor, this is when you enable Azure Landing Zones, we enable all the kind of connections for logging to the central log analytics workspace, and we might drop. Right, and that's it. Now, we recognize that doesn't necessarily get you an end-to-end observability, and we need to help you there. We need to help our customers in adopting Monitor and having a more mature monitoring conversation internally. So that's something we're investing a lot of time in as well. We're looking at kind of like a baseline of alerts. So you're new to Azure, you want to click Azure Landing Zones and go, what alert should I have? Because that's a conversation that all our customers want to know about, is what do I need to turn on from scratch? So if we can help you by, the 80-20 rule, trying to get 80% of those alerts set up, that is going to benefit you greatly. And then, that 20% that you need to kind of address for your specific needs. So working in that space as well. The accelerators side, so around, the DevOps pipelines, Bicep is obviously a relatively, it's not, how old, Bicep's not that new anymore, isn't it? Yeah, oh wow, yeah, so it's, but when was it GA? So it's GA at the beginning of this year, was it? I think, yeah. So I think it was kind of February time. So, so you saw the accelerators, Biceps come to the table now. We're kind of continually looking at how we make it easier to go from that kind of click ops, that click to deploy, to how do you do infrastructure as code? I'm sure Nick's going to talk about, his experience in here as well, which is a really good insight for you as well, if you're kind of on that journey or your customers are. We are recognizing that we need to provide more training and learning material as well. So my colleague Jeff is working on some work here to kind of give you more guidance and training. I'm sure over the last couple of years you've seen Microsoft kind of invest more in kind of exams and certification and trying to encourage that for everybody. So we obviously recognize Azure Landing Zone needs that as well. So there's a lot going on in Azure Landing Zone, as you probably heard from our conversations here. So I think that is me, Jack. So I'm going to pass back to you to close out.
And Paul sort of did find the one, monitoring enhancements, where if any of you are wondering about MMA to Azure Monitor migration, you see he's got it now. We're doing lots of work behind the scenes. So if any of you have seen the warning notices appear in the portal, we're working really closely with the Azure Monitor team, like probably at least multiple emails per day at the moment. So we are nearly ready to make the migration ourselves. So stay tuned. But let us know if you're interested. There's a GitHub issue. Just upvote it, and that'll harass Paul to do it even more. So go for it. Do harass Paul. And on that note, we do want to hear from you, right? So all of these places are our repos, so aka.ms/ALZ. Generally type something you think should exist, and it probably does after ALZ because we've created enough short links. But any of these places, log an issue. If you create it in the wrong place, doesn't matter, we'll move it, that's fine. But do let us know. We want to hear from you, and that's the best way of getting in touch with us, because that then gets tracked into our internal project management tools as well. So please do raise the issues. Oh yeah, put it up on screen. Let's see what other questions online. I can't see it, so read it out to me. But yeah, let's read the question.
Roger Smets online. Apologies if I've butchered your name there. But we went down a single route of a subscription. What are our options? We do have some resources in Azure, but that is changing under a single subscription. How do they deal with that?
So it sounds like the customer has done a single subscription, which, you know, nothing wrong with that. Many people start that way. But how do you get out of it? Now, we have specific guidance inside of the Align methodology of part of Azure Landing Zones. So if you go to the Azure Landing Zones documentation, there's an Align tab. And in that Align table of contents, you'll find how do I transition into the enterprise scale architecture. There is one scenario in there at the moment, which luckily enough is all about single subscription because I wrote it about a year ago. So you should find guidance in there about how to migrate out of that scenario. And we are looking to add 4 more scenarios around what happens if I've got a different management group hierarchy, what happens if I've got 3 subscriptions, what happens like various flavors that we see commonly in customers. So yeah, lots of cool stuff coming there. So let us know if you want to see any more particular migration guidance, but there is one for that exact scenario in our guidance already, which is fantastic. Go for it. One more question online.
So Stephen Kerr asks, are the custom policies you mentioned available outside of the landing zone templates? E.g., if we have adopted a similar framework in terms of structure, can we leverage these policies?
Fantastic question, and he's teed me up nicely. So yes, this is the whole reason we built ALZ Bicep, because we wanted it to be modular. And there are customers out there that exist that go, hey, look, we like what you do, we follow your guidance, but actually we just want the policy bit, or we just want the management groups bit. We don't want all the other stuff that comes with it. Bicep is written in a modular fashion. So if you check out the Bicep repo at this link here, aka.ms/ALZ/Bicep, you will find the custom policy definitions folder inside the policy folder. And that has all of the policies that we deploy inside of Azure Landing Zones that you can get all the definitions straight away in there. And it will load them all into your tenant. And they are all up to date across all 3 implementations. So whether you pick Terraform, the portal, or Bicep, the source of truth is the bottom repo, the portal experience. And there's a couple of GitHub actions that run and pull them in and make sure they're up to date in the other implementations. So they're always up to date. It is currently failing in Bicep because we have just done some policy refactoring work that Paul mentioned. Sorry, it is on my list. I will get it fixed. But no, there are no differences, and we haven't made any change to policy. So there is no difference at the moment, but the action does show us failing. So we will fix that, but it's nothing to worry about because there's no difference right now. Cool. Any questions from the room? Who wants to ask an awkward one? Mr. Murphy. Great question. So the question was for the room or online. Is there any limitations in terms of using CSP subscriptions for partners? Absolutely not, because I did used to work with you guys and I did used to work in CSP world. So I wrote the guidance that says, no, there isn't. So if you look at the billing guidance in the overview page, I clearly show that you can have subscriptions from EA, MCA, MPA, CSP. Effectively, we could do a whole nother session on this, but there is it doesn't matter where the billing model is for the subscription. As long as it's joined to the same tenant, you can govern it with Azure Landing Zone. So whether it's an MPN subscription you get $150 a month with, you can still play with it. So yeah, absolutely fine. Or $115 and don't try and migrate it. Any other questions in the room? Yeah, go for it.
So you've got the use of the analytics workspace, which is absolutely great. Are you giving any guidance at all for the use of the Defender products and whether we need a SIM underneath the whole thing?
Good question. Good question. So there is a lot of hot debate in this area, and Mr. Paul's Grimley's ears are pricking up because there is some conflicting guidance at the moment around workspace design, whether you need one for your SIEM product, one for your monitoring stuff. We are raising this in the right places and getting everybody to talk to each other to try and work this out. At the moment, a single workspace is definitely the right approach. We do see some teams that have a very dedicated security function that are absolutely adamant that they need their own workspace. That's fine. Just be aware you will be paying twice for the data because you're putting potentially the same logs in 2 places. And there are ways to handle that with RBAC on a single workspace. Out of the box with Azure Landing Zones, we do install the Sentinel solution. So our guidance is to use Sentinel, obviously being a Microsoft product and aligned to the Azure roadmap. That's what we would suggest. But we do not enable any rules or integration. So it's then on the customer to go and enable those bits and pieces in terms of, analytics rules, alerts, all the source stuff on top of that. So yeah, that's effectively where we are with log analytics workspaces. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, it's just the overall deployment of Defender and the SIM, which becomes, I mean, there's Defender for.
Well, Defender for everything. Yeah, absolutely. So Defender for cloud, the Azure-based stuff, we enable via policy automatically on all subscriptions via. Yeah. So you get all the standard tiers enabled on every subscription, and all of the export logs go into the centralized workspace. So you sort of, when you go in Sentinel, you need to click the plugins, it goes, oh, I've already got all the data for this done. So we do help you get there, but Defender for apps, Defender for identity, all those other things, unfortunately, they're not exposed via Azure ARM APIs. They're more, M365 style products. So they're quite hard to automate from an Azure Landing Zones perspective because we use Azure Resource Manager to do everything. If you would like to see that, please do raise an issue on one of these repos and we can take that in as a feature request and start looking into it, because it's not the first time we've heard it, but we haven't heard enough to push it through the list of features to prioritize. So yeah, please do go and raise an issue. But yeah, good question.
So let's give all Jack a round of applause, I think. So we're going to take a quick 5-minute break now. People in the room, grab some more pizza and beer. Online people, please just get a drink and please stay with us. We'll be back in about 5 minutes where we'll be continuing with the talk from Nick. Thanks very much. Going to resume now, just mindful of time. Okay, I'd like to welcome Nick from our Sussex-based customer. Nick, I'll let you do an intro of yourself, but over to you.
Hello. Yeah, so I'm Nick Fry, and I'm coming with a customer experience perspective to this. So I've been with Hastings for just over 4 years. I've been using Azure for 10, and I started on Azure Service Manager, if anyone can remember that, which was a lovely product. And yeah, I've been in IT for 20 years. So I want to start with the motivations about Hastings and why we started this journey. So as many of you might know and come across it, and you will see this in the CAF documentation, there's usually a big critical business event that drives your road towards another option. And for Hastings, that was a data center exit. So our data center needed to close. We need to find a new platform. And the options are obviously find another data center or start looking towards a cloud service provider like Azure. And within the leadership team, we made some decisions, my leaders and the business, and we were looking for that agility that can be provided. We've got a lot of technical capabilities that we can now make use of, which weren't available before. And there's a lot of other departments that can see benefits with the cloud tooling that's available. Oh, wrong button again. So for Hastings, we were looking at the technology. So the maturity of Azure was right for us. It offered a lot of products that we are starting to make use of, and that goes not just from the Azure platform, but that extends into the workspace experience for users, so AVD, MMD devices, and we're starting to look at all of the other products that are available. The leadership has really changed. With my new CTO coming in a couple of years ago, that journey really accelerated towards Azure. And we've started that journey with the idea that we must be the best that we can be. And we want to try and empower that digital transformation journey for everything that we do. There's the supportability of language. So we've got developers using many different tooling. So our platform engineers using Bicep now. We're doing deployments using Terraform. We've got the application teams who are wanting to make use of the Java, Python, and other languages that support our modeling and our insurance modeling capabilities that are there. Now we need to do this migration. We don't have time to transform. So we want to make sure that there's compatibility across the estates. So that includes looking at our legacy applications which have requirements. Maybe that's multicast or whether that's an SMB requirement. And Azure really fitted what we required for this fast-paced migration. We also have a reliability requirement. We want to make sure all of our data and all of our services are available in the UK. We've got the ability for the zonal resiliency, as well as the regional break with UK West. The evergreen capability as well, so the automation accounts, the ability to keep up to date with all of the accelerators, because each of these landing zones have the ability to deploy and be kept up to date with the new technologies as they come along. And we want to be able to make use regularly of doing those platform updates. And they do change, and we do have to migrate. And even in this development stage, before we go to production, that's really key. And we're also empowered to develop and innovate. And that's really quite useful because of Azure Landing Zones. We have the ability to spin up subscriptions, to test and to try and to destroy. And that's really a key benefit for us of Azure Landing Zone. So we're working quite closely with Microsoft. We've got a close link with the account team. We work closely with people like Paul and his fellow CSAs at the time. And it's that engagement through each of the different teams who specialize within these landing zones, within the products, that's really empowered us to make this mammoth task achievable. The technologies like AVS, AKS, the VMs, all of the other cloud native tools as well, that's really enabled us to start moving forward. And also we're making use. We as a company had very few Azure engineers who understood the platform and can help us move forward. So the training and the certification that was available and the opportunity to learn was really key. And just in the last year, we've had over 60 certifications achieved. So we covered this just a moment ago. So this is the cloud adoption framework for landing zones. And as you can see from the image, we spoke about what CAF kind of wants us to achieve. The ability to create a control plane for those platform resources, those shared resources, as well as the landing zone subscriptions to be able to be given out to the development teams and business units who can make use of them. So the core concept of landing zone is that it's a policy-driven governance model. We apply policies, we control what's happening, and that ability to actually segment your workloads into corporate, private, subscriptions or public online, and control it through services like Azure Firewall, Secured Hub. That's really empowered us to actually start deploying our services to production within this environment. But we don't just see developers who are ready to go. And as a department, I worked in cloud engineering for a few years. We didn't have a place to test. And that's really where the canary model came along. We need somewhere which was where you could test the impact of policies. Policies are pretty powerful things. You know, if you're deploying them at the tenant root group, that's not the right place to do it. The whole point is that everything is from your top level, just underneath tenant root group, and applicable to each of the sub-management groups and subscriptions. So our team has done a lot of development work regarding archetypes and modules, but we want to test them. We want to prove that route to live in an environment where we're not going to break everything. And we have, on a number of occasions, caused products to fail or applications that we expected to work just by testing them in Canary. We caught that before we moved it and made it live for people to consume. So on this journey, Paul and I sat down. I remember the meeting really well, and we battled around this platform landing zone and what those management group looks like. Yes, I was on the side of prod, test, and dev management groups. I won't lie. And Jack, in answer to your question, round about 429, I think, were our subscription count. But this model here, the platform landing zone, really focuses on the control plane and the platform teams who are looking after everything that you're doing. We have the connectivity subscriptions, the management, and the identity, ensuring that your Active Directory controllers that you are likely to have, because it's very rare that people haven't got an on-premise estate already. We can get those Active Directory controllers into a secure environment where it's controlled using proper PIM and RBAC control there. The management subscription, as we'll go through later, is all about that log analytics workspace, the Sentinel connections, and really providing the automatic updates. So where you might have been using WSUS for quite a long time, or SCOM, you know, this update management platform is all built in as part of an automation account. And the connectivity subscriptions really are that. There are different models depending on which one you choose. We went for the virtual WAN hub, but there's also options for VNet hubs as well. So this kind of forms your platform landing zone before you attempt your workloads, your applications. One of the key areas that we need to look at is the subscription democratization, or the workloads. And these are the subscriptions that we give out to people to consume and to use. So as per the guidance, they're a unit of management. They're really key to understand who they belong to, where the cost center is. And through the automation account, and I'll cover this later as well, we use it in a way which has a single owner across all of our subscriptions. For a landing zone, it's critical, absolutely critical, to create a tagging strategy and get that in there right at the beginning of your journey, because that is allowing you to track the environment that this workload is about, whether it's shared, whether or not it is a dev environment. How is that cost center attached? Who is the owner? Who requested it? And we can really drive that down into resources via policy to that landing zone. We also went down the path of pre-staging it with core components. And this is something that you may want to do or you may not. But for us, networking was pretty critical. You've got an address space. Say you want to allocate a /8 network to Azure. But then because of ALZ, we need to break that down in the virtual networks. Who's going to manage that? If we give it to the developers, it can become difficult to make sure that they get the right allocation. So our central network team manage that. So we deploy a virtual network that's given during the deployment a network address space. It is peered to our vWAN hub. We set up the DNS and then ENSGs during that pipeline. We deploy some key vaults and storage so that it's got something at a base so that we can log things to it. And we do some shared services or some dashboards if required. But we also have the policy inheritance. So as part of enterprise scale, ALZ, policies are assigned. And the policy assignment usually happens at a management group level before it gets down to the subscription. And only specific things for the subscription are deployed at the bottom. But we also see other policies that we like Log Analytics Workspace, Security Center, Network Watcher. And they are applied in this diagram at Contoso. And that ensures that everything is logged. It all has the same details. Everything is tracked and we can monitor it from one location. Service principals and PIM access. Really good stuff. So the PIM is probably the most valuable to us. If you grant direct access to people. They have the ability to just go in, create, destroy. You can't control it. With PIM access, we can take that up a level. We can request access for a time-bound period. We can tag it to an approval chain. And that cloud governance and change control process can all form an approval process at the PIM level. Now, service principles are also important for the next one, which is integrating with the DevOps project. Now, we use Azure DevOps for some of our work. When deploying a subscription, we are creating a service connection, and that service connection is pushed into the DevOps project. Because when you hand it over to your end user, your consumer, the last thing you want to then be doing is having to go back through and add all of the RBAC controls and start trying to add that all back in again. This way, the pipelines are all pre-configured with a service account, and they can start doing their deployment straight away. And mainly, it becomes a lot more scalable. The scaling is probably the thing that is most beneficial to us. Having to go and manually create a subscription, deploy the resources, validate all of the network connections, it becomes time consuming. And we've got the time down now. We've done iterations of this a few times, and we're now at a point where we can do this deployment in a few minutes and get a number of subscriptions. How did we do it? This one was a good one. At the time, the bicep modules weren't about. We weren't too sure about the coding. A DevOps function was fairly new to Hastings. So we used the click to deploy method, the accelerator. And this was really good. This was great for us because you provide a few inputs. You provide a name of a company or an abbreviation. You choose the deployment region that you want to be deploying to. You answer some more. Do you want it to be a dedicated subscription for each of those management, connectivity, and identity subscriptions? Because that's the guidance. That's the thing that Microsoft are recommending. We want to try and follow that because everything that we do, every iteration, will be dependent on that. If we vary it and Microsoft update their code, then when we try to redeploy, we've got a lot of work to try and make sure that that's going to be successful. We can choose the Sentinel deployment via this method. We can choose the retention days, look at whether we deploy resource health, and are there some default policies that we wanted to put in, like prevent public access to Corp. And finally, the good one at the end, which is GitHub. Now, we had two options for this. We chose DevOps at the time, but GitHub is, I think, the preferred method now. Yeah. But they do the same thing. And, you know, for us, we wanted to keep everything we were doing in one place. But really, you can set this up now or you can set it up after. And I think we went down the route of setting it up after. So ASOPS for us became that declarative approach. It was that repo which gives us that representation of our live estate in code. So we can see, based on the folders, so we can see that here under ASOPS Contoso, that would be your top level management group. Then you break down and you will have representation in folders of those management groups and the subscriptions under them and the policies assigned to those subscriptions. Also under here, you see custom policies as well. Now, the built-in policies aren't represented, or at least weren't. No. So built-in policies which Azure give you in the policy assignment area, so Azure policy, you won't see them. If it's a custom policy, they appear here, and you can assign those and you can customize those and attach them. But what this gives us is a very clear base of what exists and what we are using and what we've attached. But we did learn some stuff. So subscription democratization is attached to a single user account in this environment. So that enrollment account collects all the billing. That billing goes to our finance team. They get horrified at how much this random person has spent. And then we have to try and unpick who owns which subscription and then try and cross-reference that. Tagging people, tagging. Must do it. ASOPS uses a very privileged account. The service account that you create for this process has the ability to make changes across the production management group structure. Make sure when you're using it, you apply approval processes. We want to ensure that when that's deployed, that someone hasn't gone in and deleted something or changed the policy because it reflects and has widespread impact. Hasn't happened to us, but it could. There were some things that we noticed in some of the deployments we were doing, like the job names weren't unique. And that uniqueness was pretty important to us. We were experiencing quite long delays when doing some of our policy remediations. So when you deploy via this method, a subscription, so we used a template, deployed it, we were trying to connect a subscription. It wasn't working, it was taking a long time. We tried to change region, we couldn't, the deployment names were the same. You would have to go through delete your history in order to get that working again. But also, as we started this journey, when was it, Paul? February 21? So when we were starting this journey, the vWAN hub was quite a new technology. It wasn't supported or isn't still supported much in the connected subscriptions. So I had to reach out to Paul and we had conversations with the product team at that time, and we managed to get the code reworked for us. Absolutely.
You raised a really good point. So I just want to clear up the vWAN stuff, right? So it's all to do with multiple deployments to vWAN at the same time, right? So the virtual WAN API, you can't do multiple puts to. So if you created, like Nick does, like creates 10 subscriptions at a go, and you all try to peer all of those VNets back to vWAN at the same time, the virtual WAN hub goes, whoa, 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 I can do one at a time, and it fails the other 9, which is really annoying when you're doing landing zone subscription vending. So this is something the product team are aware of, and they are trying to work on and fix. I actually developed a workaround the other day for another customer for this, because using some deployment scripts and stuff, which I'm going to be posting in Architecture Centers very soon, using a Bicep deployment script. So there is a workaround, but not in policy and the ways that Hastings were doing it at the time. Hence why VNet Hub is VNet Hub. A traditional VNet doesn't have that same limitation. You can throw like 10 peerings at a time and it gets on with it. It's the vWAN at RP. So it is possible. It does work, but you can't do 10 subscriptions in a batch. You have to do one, then the other, then the other. It's annoying, but that's the way it is. Raise a bug if it's annoying you. We can go and harass the product team even more. Cheers.
Thank you. So the other part of ASOPS was the policy. So we mentioned it. It's the policy-driven governance. It provides a lot of the boundaries, the guardrails that we use. So in this example, I think this is one of yours actually, Jack, allowed locations. So limiting what can be deployed and the region that it can be deployed to using policy. And that's great because we can enforce this. We can restrict the public IP so that corp subscriptions don't have access to the internet, so that people can't come in. You don't want your PII to be released through a rogue storage account. So the policy is there to provide those guardrails and has been really well used across a number of areas. It can be used to do RBAC management. We can create subscriptions through policy. And we want to make sure that when we're doing this, we're also securing the pipeline, because obviously we don't want policies which haven't been tested to be getting out there. So we make sure that what's coming through has been validated. The first one, prod and canary. So we've really had a problem in our canary deployment, in that we probably did it 6 months apart, and we deployed on 2 different versions of the deploy to Azure. We got different policies in one to the other. It's been very difficult to marry the 2 up, and there was no clear guidance really on how to keep them in sync. So it's been an area that we're going to have to revisit. It's definitely something that was put in to enable us to test pretty rapidly. It's also really difficult to remove policies. So with AzOps, it's a great tool, it's a great repo, and the pipelines do wonders for us. But when you deploy a policy, you're deploying the code into Azure. You're not actually referring to an actual resource. So if you need to remove it, you need to use delete pipelines and reference the policy and find it. And we had instances where we'd tried to deploy a subscription. It would deploy the subscription itself. It would create the network. It would try to do a peering, and it would fail because there was an overlapping IP address range. But to remove it, you then had to remove the virtual network, remove all the resources, delete the policy, cancel the subscription, probably change the name. In Azure, it referenced the name in the deployment, so it was really difficult to reuse. You then had to catch up AzOps to know that it had been removed from the environment before you then tried again. So all in all, it was about 4 hours to remove a failed subscription deployment. It was pretty long and pretty troublesome, and we've moved away from that in a way. So in summary, it's really important to prepare your ALZs. You know, the platform is key. Developing a strategy over your workload subscriptions, understanding how the network components work together and live together. Ensure you've got a tagging policy early, because that really saves a lot of us from trying to do manual remediation over what has been deployed and who actually owns it. Make sure you secure your deployment pipelines via RBAC controls. DevOps links in very well with your Azure Active Directory, so it's just a natural extension of that. And it also links into your ITSM tool as well. So if you're using someone like ServiceNow or something, then you can also get approvals through that method as well. So if change control is really key for you and you've got an ITSM, it can usually link in with that. It's really straightforward to update policies. I know it's difficult to remove it, but it's also really simple to change a value and to republish that policy. It will find it, it will update the value, and you can move it really simply from an audit method into an apply. Subscription democratization is important. I know I've said that there have been issues with it, but we've worked around it and we've done it in different methods. It's definitely important to be able to empower your users to get that agility and deployment for lots of your workloads out there. They're going to be wanting 5, 10 different types of environments and to test the same thing over and over again. If you're having to rebuild it every single time or trying to clear up what was deployed first time, it really isn't worth the effort. Get the democratization right, get the templates and the deployment's right. And for those who are focused on network and security controls, this is a really good place. Get your codes right, get your deployment method right. As I said, policy, try not to use policy. I think Jack will chip in here in a minute, but I don't think policy is the right thing to do to deploy resources for subscriptions like the networking components. It's not good to remediate, to see that it's not got the network and to try and deploy it. It takes too long. We encountered 45 minutes to do a deployment pipeline, which is way too long. It should be 5 minutes or so. We encountered an issue where people with contributor rights to a subscription deleted their virtual network in their subscription against the vWAN hub, and it breaks the vWAN hub management front end. And our network teams were like, "Oh my god, what's happened?" And we had to raise a case with Microsoft, and then Microsoft had to go in the background and to delete it and to copy it and to relaunch it. It was a world of pain for something that was very easily fixed. Don't let users do networking or contributor access. Removing resources is harder via ASOps, but then again, once you move to your subscription democratization model and you get those subscriptions into the project teams areas, then that becomes less of an issue. They're usually developing in a different language. Maybe it's Bicep, maybe it's Terraform. But once it's out there, it's there for them to consume. And you're going to need to work on a lot of policy development. It's not easy to do all this, especially afresh and trying to do this journey to start with. And we were lucky in that we had people who were aligned to our account for periods of time to help enable that. Work on your policies, learn your policies, understand what it's doing. They are really valuable. Just put in those guardrails. That's really important. Sure.
Was about expecting Azure Landing Zone to be all done for you, and you could go and do production, and you could keep that conversation.
Yeah. So Paul's just reminded me that my old line manager said that when ALZ was pitched to us and we were reviewing this, the assumption was that landing zones was already there for workloads. What I demonstrated from my journey with Paul is that ALZ takes different forms. To get ready for any type of environment and to get your customers or yourselves ready for scaling options, the ALZ accelerator that I demonstrated there is for platforms. It gives you the management group. It gives you all the foundations, the platforms, the connectivity, identity, and management. There are new accelerators coming along all the time. I think there's one for AKS. There are others. But we didn't understand at the time that Azure Landing Zone didn't mean the workloads for users to consume. And that took a long time for us to redevelop. We weren't prepared. So we hoped the journey to actually going live was going to be a lot sooner. And it did take a lot of rework and preparation to bring us along and ready for that to start. So we deviated. It's not massively away from what ALZ is. We took the networking component, so we still use ASOPs to deploy the subscription, but we consume archetypes and Bicep modules from other repos to achieve the same result. So we just invoke other things. We also rushed Canary. We wanted to prove what we were doing before we started deploying it to our production management group structure. I think we have identified ourselves that it was a little bit too fast. We need to just make sure that we consume it in the right way. And I know that we're going to try and get a Microsoft engagement just to rewalk that. But Canary for us was really important for that blast radius testing. You know, I don't want to deploy this policy until I know what impact it's going to have on the workloads below it. So that route to live, that understanding for us was a real key driver for deploying Canary. And I think it's really pitched for enterprise scale. So those people with a lot more subscriptions and wider impact, although it is applicable and can be consumed by anyone, it's just setting up the management group structure and everything. My only ask, Jack, Ryan, Paul, I hope you're listening. Please get some IP address management solutions sorted. We can. I think many people will be.
I think we're already in the process of writing.
Yeah.
I've already had a conversation. Nothing's imminent, but if it's something
Yep.
that the community want, it will really help us drive attention to the product. So if you want IPAM, I think
please everyone raise an issue. It's really important.
Well, if somebody raised one issue, just put thumbs up on it.
I think why is this important? I think to Nick, just to go back to why he's put it on here, is because when you vend subscriptions, you have to manually put in your IP range, and this is where Nick was talking about the overlap, which meant that when it overlapped, he had to then re-go or whoever was doing it had to then redo that VNet. So that was a problem for him. Whereas obviously, if there was an IPAM solution, you could connect straight into that and say, what's my next block of IP addresses that I can use, and that would simplify the vending experience. So yeah, it's not imminent, but you know, I welcome feedback if you want to add to Nick and raise something in the repo. This is the way I, as a program manager, will take that feedback, and it helps me provide evidence cases to the product group to say, look, this is what our field want to from Microsoft. So please stand up and listen. So your voice counts. We can honestly tell you that does. Tonight, if you've got an issue, raise it. We will listen. We can't guarantee we'll fix it because the product group might say they've got more important things to do, and we have to fight those battles. But we will try and work on your behalf to do that. Sorry, Nick. Back to you.
Cheers. So yeah, raise one issue and like it. And the other section is a built-in policy for a centralized DNS solution. Is it? That's really good. Because if you're checking the CAF guidance and everything else, and you type in DNS and you say enterprise, you get DNS at scale, which is great. And then they say, create a policy and put this in it, and then do that with it, and then apply it here. And you're kind of going, well, okay, that references 4 types of resource. I'm pretty sure that Microsoft have more than 4 resources. So this is going to take a lot of work for an engineer or a developer to code this all in. A built-in DNS solution would be greatly received. Questions?
Do you have some from the audience online? So let's kick off there. So I'll ask one. So one of them, Nick, was around, you mentioned service principles are given to every application team and they're bounded to the pipeline. How do you create those service principles was the question. Like, do you create them as part of your pipeline? Do you what's the story there?
So I'm going to bow out slightly in that I moved out of engineering as this was being developed and I moved into architecture. However, I do know that the engineers who worked on these pipelines have built in modules. So there will be a section that will say, go off and create a service principle. And there is a small amount of code that we put in, which then references through a DevOps command line reference and tags it against a named a named project. So it's important that whatever pipeline that you are running or environment that you run into has the project name in, you're referencing that as part of your deployment.
Awesome, good answer. The other one was around Ryan. Remind me. Fantastic. So I'm going to cover this one, and Paul's probably itching to cover this one as well. We mentioned it earlier around Evergreen, our code name Evergreen. Let's call it that. So updating custom policies is not easy. As Nick mentioned, deleting them is not easy either. And you need to do that sometimes when you update a definition and add new parameters and don't provide default values. And the policy RP is not your friend at sometimes. There is something coming from the policy team that they have announced publicly called versioning. So go and check out the Azure Deployments and Governance YouTube channel. They talk about it on there, which will allow this thing to happen a lot more easier. Keep your eyes peeled. We're waiting for it eagerly. In terms of updating policies for ALZ, we are working on guidance, and we are working with customers like Nick, who have shouted loud and clear that this is a pain. We have an issue on the Bicep repo for the same thing. If you are a Terraform customer, however, your journey is a little bit better because the state is handled externally and we can do some more intelligent things, but it's still not perfect, right? There are still some things that the policy RP plays up. So not great, but we're working on it. Like we've heard loud and clear, and we're sorting that one out. Any more questions from external? How long did the transition take, Nick, to go to ALZ?
So we started in February 21. The platform's pretty simple, you know, it's click and deploy, and you get the majority of your resources already in place. Where you then take the next step to AsOps, it takes a lot of development. I would say that we're nowhere near finished. It's a lot of iteration, you know, find out what your needs are, start looking at what's available to you, put in your guardrails via policy. But then it's just a development process, incrementally changing. The accelerators are always changing. So if there's functionality that you would benefit from, policies that have changed, you know, maybe something like instead of using App Gateway, you want to use Nginx or something like that. You know, it's always changing. So we are still on the journey. You know, our data center migration is still continuing and we're very close. So once we get past this, it will be a case of revisiting pretty much everything, just making sure that it's up to date, helping our operation teams catch up, take everything into day 2 operations, and then start working again on our next project. So.
Good answer. So I think Nick's hit on a good point there, right? ALZ, as he mentioned, is a bootstrap, right? It's built to be applicable to most of our customers across all industries, shapes, sizes, whatever, and give you that 80%, that leg up to get you going, right? It's not built to be the perfect solution for every customer. It certainly can be for some, but it's built to give you that starting point and then build on top of and add more on top of. So I think that is us finished, right? Any questions from the audience in the room? Yes, go for it.
Yeah, I was very interested. I just wondered, were there any unexpected costs, right? Things like licensing or data array?
Okay, so the question was, are there any unexpected costs from using Azure Landing Zones or from your project? First note, go and check the FAQ. We do document the costs, but...
So for us, I guess Azure Landing Zones is fairly low in cost in terms of it's deploying a structure, it's building out those management groups, it's preparing the subscriptions ready. Yes, you are starting to deploy some resources, some things that are happening immediately. Virtual WAN hub, that's a costed item. Azure Firewall, secured hub, they are additional costs. If you want multiple regions, you need to consider how early do you want to have those available to you. Sentinel costs. If you're deploying Sentinel, you're starting to pay for it and you're starting to ingest logs straight away. When things are changing, you're capturing that immediately. It's all great stuff. It's usable stuff. Make sure that you're logging the right things not just choosing everything. What do you need to retain and actually make use of? But I would then say that you then move into the workload side. So beyond that, we're doing a data center migration. We don't have a lot of time to do a transformation. Cloud native and new ways of doing things will be a different cost model. We are doing a lot of legacy at the moment, and that's accepted, but it's not the best way of doing things. If you have time and you can follow that CAF strategy, you know, assess, plan, transform, you know, those stages are really, really key. Prepare the foundations early, try and get them right, because if you're trying to deploy those subscriptions out and then you're having to tear them down, redeploy each time to get it right, you know, that first workload when you're ready to move into Azure, it may have to be deleted a couple of times. That's all I'm saying.
But yeah, ALZ is free, but so only the resources that it deploys cost. So management groups, policy, all that stuff are free to use. But you know, if it deploys and configures Defender on your subscriptions, that has a cost associated to it based on the resources. DDoS standard, for example, is like $3,500 a month. Right? It's not recommended for everybody. Most production workloads, absolutely. If Nick hasn't got it enabled, I will shout at him tomorrow. But I'm pretty sure he has got it enabled. But you know, not all businesses can afford that, right? That might be their total Azure cost for the year in one go. So it's optional, but it's only those resources you deploy into those subscriptions that cost money. ALZ itself is completely free. Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, internally at Microsoft, people test this with their MSDN subscription. So all the CSAs that you engage with in, you know, across your customers, they just do this in their MSDN subscriptions on 115 quid a month or $150 a month, right? So you can absolutely do it. If you deploy DDoS, you've got about 8 hours. So be quick. Disable DDoS, right? I have been caught out so many times where I've left it like 8 hours and I go back and then you can't delete it because your subscription is disabled because you've spent all your money. So you end up just waiting for the end of the month and then having to go, you did delete your DDoS plan. So be careful of DDoS is probably what I'm trying to say. But it's a very, very important service to enable if you're enabling production workloads. So please do enable it. Any other questions, Ryan? Yeah.
Have you tried with the different type of deployment, like a blue-green deployment is there for, or specifically you went for a canary deployment?
I'll take that one if you don't mind, Nick. So
Yeah, sure.
we use the term canary to differentiate. Sorry, that's a very good point. The question was, why do we use canary? What about trying something like blue-green or AB or something like that, a different testing strategy? I think it's important to understand that ALZ is more focused not around sort of web development and stuff like that, where you would publish a new application and test alongside and do something like blue-green or AB. The reason we use the term canary is because it's really, I'd call it a dev environment, right? But if I call it dev, people think about dev for workloads rather than dev of the platform. So it's about using a different term for platform or IT pros that makes them think differently instead of it's just a dumping ground to do stuff. No, it's a replica of production, but it's a canary environment. So it's for testing policies, not for testing deployments. Like you wouldn't ever put any of your production workloads inside of the canary environment. It's all test subscriptions that the platform team are using to make sure their policies work as expected before putting them in production. So hopefully that answers your question. Yes, this man first. Go for it.
What's your estimated effort to get a vanilla landing zone spun up in an Azure subscription?
Great question. So spinning it up in your tenant, the portal experience, if you don't select any of the networking options like VPN gateways, express route gateways, 15 minutes. Like you can push the button, like I will do a test, go and make a coffee and come back and be like, oh, it worked, and then delete it all again. If you use Bicep, a little bit longer because it's individual modules, so maybe an hour. Terraform, just because of the way it sequences stuff, about 30 minutes at the moment. So you can get the base ALZ config deployed very, very quickly. And that's what we would suggest you do to really get hands-on with it and just disable the stuff that costs like DDoS, and then go and look at the management group hierarchy, put some policies in place, put your subscription in the core landing zone, and then try and do stuff and see what happens. Get hands-on with it is the best way to try. And then we had another question.
Yeah, great talk. Thank you. Very interesting. What you've started off with the data center and no Azure. Now you've got Azure, and I assume you've still got a data center to a certain extent. What percentage of load have you moved into Azure, and when do you see retiring the data center?
We are rapidly closing down services. We've done quite a large number of our workloads, but our core platform, our policy platform, is still within our data center. And that does actually account for a large number of our servers that are active. So I would like to say, I'm hoping to say in a few weeks, once this has moved forward, but we'll see. We should close down probably 90% of our data center with a couple of legacy systems that we need to move out because they're not supportable in the cloud. But I think that's a fair estimate. I'm looking at my CTO who's actually here tonight. So sorry, can you pass that back, please?
So I think, well, 500,000 quotes a day are enriched using native Azure features actually in a native Azure environment. So, and that's the number of insurance quotes we quote a day. And I think that's a really important part of the sort of, yes, we're doing a legacy, but we have built a next generation platform that we use every day to quote for anybody that buys insurance with us. But yeah, I think by the middle of November, we should pretty much be closing down every data center. So that's a pretty big achievement. And we've done a load of other things in the background as well. So mainly Nick's hard work and Darren's hard work and a few others in the room's hard work. So.
Thank you very much. Well, any other questions, Ryan, remotely? And thank you, Simon. Yeah, absolutely. One question, and then we will close. Mr. Winter.
With the click to deploy through like GitHub and go through the accelerator, is there a way to have the output that you customize again and again to have that out as bicep, or are they two separate things that will always stay two separate things? My question is coming from an MSP point of view, where essentially templating things and having a good baseline is quite key. And what somebody to talk about a different point would be policy. And like you were saying earlier, one of my first conversations I've been having over the last couple of weeks, and we've had a couple of LinkedIn chats, understanding policies is 90% of this work. If someone goes, oh, can I have it? And you go, right, let's start the longest conversation ever. But yeah, question, bicep, click to deploy.
So click to deploy, can you export it? No, but can you see the underlying code that it uses? Yes. So in the repo, you'll see an ESLZ arm.json file. That's the ARM template that deploys the portal experience, right? So nothing's hidden, it's all exposed. Would I suggest reading it? No. Will you have nightmares about JSON? Yes. Why did we build Bicep? Because that's hard to read. So go and you look at the Bicep, it's modularized each of the deployments. And the idea is for somebody like an MSP, you could take that as inspiration, right? Fork it, clone it, whatever, or make suggestions back upstream. Say, hey, this policy I think everybody should do. Make a suggestion, right? We want to hear that stuff. But if you took Bicep, for example, you could add or put in your own policy assignments module following our pattern and following the wiki guidance that we say how to do it. And you could say, do you know what? For our customers, we take the ALZ stuff and we add on these 15 other things into these places and just have that module there so that you run that module instead of running our module instead. But it's designed to be taken and used like that and customized. And obviously Nick's policy assignments module looks probably very different to what ours looks like because they assign a number of additional policies that we wouldn't recommend to every other customer because it's specific to requirements. So, it's one of those things. But yeah, take it, clone it, fork it, use it, and if you think it should be something for everybody, let us know. All right. AzOps will pull it out of the portal though. So if you click the click to deploy button and plug in AzOps, it will pull it all back out as individual ARM templates as a state sort of pool. It's quite interesting to deploy and just experience it. But yeah, watch this space on AzOps. Yeah, taking it straight out of GitHub and we have had customers take the ARM JSON file out and then be like, hey, we tried to deploy this. We have got instructions to how to deploy it using the ARM JSON. I wouldn't recommend them unless you really, really want a painful experience. Go and use Bicep or Terraform. Yeah, if you're not hearing anything, use the portal experience. If you want a portal experience, don't read the underlying ARM because it's complicated and not designed to be an ARM thing. It's built to support a portal experience. But yeah, if you want an IAC option, go and look at Terraform, go and look at Bicep. And with that, let's draw it to a close because it's getting late and people need to get home. So thank you, Nick. Round of applause again for Nick. Thank you, mate. All right, Ryan, over to you.
Save your voice. So yeah, a bit of self-promotion stuff. We ran a podcast in lockdown. I think we got up to like 30 episodes, something like that. We probably won't get back to doing podcasts if I'm honest, but maybe if we have another lockdown, we will. But there is some good content on there, and calling out Paul's early podcast that we did on Microsoft exams. That was really landed really well with a lot of people. But we've got a lot of stuff, everything from responsible AI to what came up in Ignite, things like firewall demos. So it's all a kind of mixed bag as well. So some content there. There's also previous in-person sessions that we ran. So Jack did an awesome session on Azure Bicep a couple of months ago. We've got the recording on that. This will be on there as well. So check that out.
So there are some upcoming Silicon Brighton events. So, please do go and check these out. So go to siliconbrighton.com. And all of these are on the meetups page at the top. So click on it and you'll find them all there. We are also on there as well. So you'll see our next one when we're there. But there are some awesome events, especially Brighton Cloud at the bottom. I didn't know until Grace retweeted it the other day. And I was like, oh, I should go to that and just have a little look. So lots of great stuff. Async, I know, is a massively attended user group. So definitely go and check that one out if you're more developer focused. But yeah, some great sessions, and go and check out Silicon Brighton. They do some awesome work. And us future meetups. So we've already had somebody in the audience already put their hand forward, and we will be having a discussion about them talking next time, which is fantastic. If you do have ideas, feel free to ping us. We're on LinkedIn, you know where we are. Come and harass us, or drop us an email.
And it can be anything, right?
Yeah.
It can be. It doesn't have to be just a specific Azure technology. Things like journeys are really good. So say you did something in Azure and it was tricky because of a reason, or there's a new feature in Azure that made your life super easy. We want to hear about it because other people can learn about it. So just bring your stories, bring your knowledge. Just anything that's Azure related would be really good. And maybe we could do some short kind of stand-up 15-minute sessions, but up for ideas really.
And with that, I'd like to say thank you to all of you for attending. I hope you've had a good time. Apologies for running a little bit over. I know it's late on a Tuesday evening, but lots of good content here. Feel free to watch the recording and catch up. Please do fill in the feedback. We really do listen. Our top feedback was non-cold beer last time. So if that's all people have got to complain about, we're doing okay. And now there's ice. So we've already responded to that one. Exactly right. The Deliveroo delivering ice was incredible this afternoon. But yeah, please do give us the feedback. We really do listen.
I was just going to say as well that there is some beer left. You're more than welcome to hang and chat with us, asking further questions to the people that spoke. Also, if you want to carry on to the pub afterwards, that's very much embraced as well. Whatever works. So yeah, we're not going anywhere. We've got a lot to clean up. But yeah, thank you, and hope you had a good evening.
And one very final thing from me. Any of you who asked questions, please come and see me because I have some gifts for you. But yeah, and apart from that, enjoy, grab another beer, and thank you all.